Okay, got it. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending Merging Our Worlds, New Best Practices. This is the third event in our four-part series entitled Structural Racism in the Arts. I'd like to mention two important celebrations that are happening in our country at this time. And the first one is Hispanic Heritage Month. Hispanic Heritage Month is an annual celebration of the history and culture of the U.S. Latinx and Hispanic communities. This celebration spans from September 15th to October 15th, and it commemorates how those communities have influenced and contributed to American society at large. We'd also like to recognize Welcoming Week. Welcoming Week is a national event where thousands of people in communities large and small, rural and urban, celebrate the benefits of an inclusive society and deepen their commitment to celebrating places that are welcoming to everyone, including immigrants, refugees, and those who have been systematically excluded. So now I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Vanya Bynum, and I work at East Hub on community engagement and outreach. Our goal at East Hub is to make our uniquely diverse East Side a more welcoming and vibrant community with a thriving arts and culture core. I'm very excited to be a part of this effort to fully uplift all cultures that are represented in our communities. The groundbreaking work that we do at East Hub is relevant to the continued growth and development of the East Side and beyond. This Racism in the Arts series is an important step in the healing that will occur with full equity. So before we start, I'd like to do our land acknowledgement. East Hub acknowledges that we live and work on the unceded traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples. That includes, but is not limited to, Snoqualmie, Suquamish, Duwamish, Nisqually, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot tribes. We appreciate and honor the original residents of this land, and we stand in solidarity with them against longstanding inequities and systematic oppression. Right. We are committed to building enduring relationships and striving together to achieve just, equitable, and impactful change. We note that this kind of acknowledgement is not a new practice, but it is a traditional custom dating back centuries for many Native communities and nations. It is a powerful way of showing respect and honor the Indigenous people of the land on which we work and live. Acknowledgement is a simple way of resisting the erasure of Indigenous histories and working towards honoring and inviting the truth. So now I'll introduce our illustrious speakers. First, we have Maya Subramanian. She immigrated from India to the Pacific Northwest, thank you, welcome, 25 years ago, looking for a place to call home. Maya has dedicated herself to reducing trauma in children, and her fight has morphed into full-time work that has no title, boundaries, or monetary gain. Raised in a former colony, Maya actively seeks out BIPOC leaders to provoke thought and inspire change, deepening her service with the community through inspection, disruption, and rejection. Welcome, Maya.
Thank you.
We have Cassie Whitebread, who believes that transformational change will come from action-oriented communities using an intersectional lens. She identifies as a radical educator and community builder who strives to create brave learning spaces where people can embrace their multitudes and unlearn the norms of white supremacy culture. She's currently the education director at Seattle Works and senior consultant with Healing Equity United. Welcome, Cassie.
Thank you, happy to be here.
And we have PJ Bergstrom, who is a writer and who believes in systems of community care, mutual aid, restorative accountability, and Abolishing Carceral Society. Their background is in local organizing, research about social movements, and activism at the University of Washington and beyond. As content director for Seattle Works, they strive to share stories and content that centers our movement towards collective justice and liberation. Welcome, PJ.
Thanks, Vanya. Hi, everyone.
And our fourth speaker is Luther Hughes. He's the author of the chapbook Torched, published in 2018 with Civil Rivalry Press. And he has a new poetry collection coming out in September of 2022 called A Shiver in the Leaves from BOA Editions. Luther is the founder of Shade Literary Arts, a literary organization for queer writers of color. As a program co-director at Artist Trust, he oversees and implements the strategic direction of the Artist Trust programs as it pertains to annual planning, grant making, resources, and professional development for artists of all disciplines across Washington State. Welcome, Luther. Michael Bobbitt is the Executive Director, Mass Cultural Council, Art Leader, and EDI Consultant at East Hub. Michael's guidelines and recommendations for reimagining anti-racist culture in the arts have been adopted by several organizations throughout the US. In addition to dedicating his life to arts leadership, Michael is a director, choreographer, playwright, and a performing artist. Welcome, Michael, and I will hand you the floor and we'll get right down to business with our panel. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Vanya. It's so good to be back in the room with everyone. I'd love to call you all that attend these workshops good troublemakers. Maybe East Hub should make a research, make some t-shirts for us. Good troublemakers, East Hub troublemakers. I'm excited to be in the room with you all. Just a reminder that we'll go over the agenda and the group agreements in a second. Why don't we do that right now? In fact, our agenda for today, we'll go over the group agreements and then we'll start our panel discussion. We're going to hit 4 key areas: governance, distributed leadership, anti-racist grant making, and then affinity spaces for whites and BIPOCs. And then we'll have time for some Q&A. So I'm very excited about that. And why don't we go ahead and pop right into our group agreements. Just remember that anti-racism is acts of love. All of the work, anti-racism, racial equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of this is acts of love, showing love to people that have never been loved by this country before. We also want to choose love over anxiety. Sometimes the anxiety of making change overwhelms us, and so we choose to not love the people that we're trying to love. A brave space is better than a safe space. This is a space for learning and growing, and sometimes we may say things that maybe cause us harm, but we'll acknowledge that and we'll take that feedback in a graceful way. Learning starts where knowledge ends. This is a place where the things that we know, we're going to expand. Lived experience trumps intellect. Those who are experiencing racism know more than those who do not. Embrace discomfort. This work that we're doing is not easy and it should not be comfortable. None of us have the right to be comfortable in these spaces. Listening opens hearts and minds. And then lastly, and the most important thing is that it is important to leave every single conversation and learning that you have about racial equity with some actions and ideas. Why don't we jump right in? Maya, we'd love to give you a minute to talk a little bit about some of the experiences you've had and actions you have witnessed and the various boards that you have been involved with.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I've learned so much from just the first 2 parts of this series, and it's absolutely delightful to be able to give back a little bit today to this community that I've come to love a lot. I've been serving on committees, boards, various groups for about 10 years. And if you're kind of new to the space or you're just getting started, you may say, this is a great time. We're seeing a lot of equity-related conversations being had. Many organizations, and if you go to their websites, you'll see their equity statements. Almost all organizations around me have some form of equity committee. People come to me who are new to board service, tell me, this is a great time, right? Things are changing. We're peeling the layers of the onion. There's a lot of hope. But what I'm seeing is what's happening in the governance space. There's something shifting in the governance space. And only a few people are starting to see that, which is as we address whiteness, overt whiteness on the board by diversifying, by bringing in a racial diversity and changing board giving, talking about lived experience being represented on the board, I feel like whiteness is morphing and becoming more unreachable, invisible, but also pretty solid. And you see this at the national level. We've been seeing this in our country since 2016, is every time you talk about equity and justice, there's a backlash, there's a counter response. And that's not happening just at our country level and just dividing our country. It's happening within boards as well. And you really witness this in governance. There is a trend of making our governance equitable governance, but right now that's where the fight is.
And are you seeing this across the various boards that you're serving on? This is not unique to one board?
I'm seeing this across this sort of whiteness, maybe not literally wanting to get into the governance committee, but wanting to be sort of this forming of what I call a shadow board that wants to sit above the actual board. So today, if you go to really, what I consider healthy spaces, the board would, have, BIPOC, it would have, some attempt at intersectionality. You'll have people with lived experience, neurodivergence represented. But what I'm seeing is the founders, the first generation volunteers, the major donors, those who believe they have birthed and nurtured the organization, feel not heard. They feel sort of ousted, like, that they're being asked to leave the room. And when I make space to listen to them, because I see this backlash, I see grief, and I'm trying to explain to them, equity isn't just a bunch of changes, it's rooted in justice. Some of them tell me that the organization doesn't look recognizable anymore. The faces don't feel familiar anymore. The changes are too risky. The people who are now sitting as board members do not have any experience. They will not be able to lead. They will not be able to do strategic things and fight for the organization through thick and thin. There's this complete lack of trust as we work hard to onboard people that look like our community, and we want them to lead and have a say on the board. There's the former board, just loosely I'm calling them former board, they don't want to let go control. They want their fingers in the bylaws. They want to have a say in the bylaws. They want to have a say in the board composition. They want staff to run major programs or changes by them. And this happens in very invisible ways. And a lot of people who are still in their journey, like even me 2 years ago, we're not able to see this as symbols of whiteness, as whiteness just not visible. So we're still very early in our learning to detect whiteness, to label it, to call it out, and how to take action against it. We're still, that's where I see a lot of the boards around me, committees around me struggling with.
Yeah, so one of the reactions you're seeing to the change, into the growth, and to the building of an anti-racist culture on the board is a double downing on practice, but in a more covert way. So it's happening in the background. It may not be happening in the meetings because it could be scary for them to say, no, I want you to keep it the same way it was. It's happening in the backgrounds. So, my friends, we talked about that when we talked about some of the obstacles you may encounter when you are building an anti-racist organization, that you're going to find what is known as white solidarity. And actually, Maya, I think your term is even stronger, like a shadow board, this board that is a shadow of the former board, but still is pushing for control and to maintain the status quo. The status quo, everyone, is not an accident. It is not an accident. It is done on purpose. So the question I have for you is how do you think we fix that? What is the solution for some of that?
I think we need to, can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to continue deeper into this conversation. Sometimes people tell me that, okay, we've made quite a lot of progress and it's going to be easier, correct? It's going to be like peeling the onion, and after you kind of get started, it's going to get easier. And to me, I want to adjust that expectation. I don't think it is going to get easier. The saying, that we're tackling the taking the low-hanging fruits is what comes to mind. Is we are now tackling the easier options right now. The equity statement, the equity committee, the diversifying of the board, things like that. But I think what is left to tackle are the really harder pieces. Is how do we do legacy? How do we really make people belong? How do we support various forms of dissent? How do we normalize disruption, right? So the harder work that we don't even have a lot of language on yet is all of us, a lot of us, even people of color, need training, and we need to continue to be talking about it.
Great. Why don't we put up Maya's slide so everyone can read it a little bit, but just to recap, so I'm glad you mentioned people of color. It is important that people of color are working on other things. We should be doing things like understanding radical self-care, racialized trauma, intersectionality, internal racism, so that we can recognize when we are upholding whiteness and white supremacy thoughts and practices and policies. But the other thing too to remind everyone of is that this work it's a long game, and we want to infuse it into the culture, as Maya mentioned. It has to be part of the everyday practice, not something we do on the side, and that people aren't afraid of change. We change all the time. It is loss. People are afraid of losing something. And what Maya is describing, this reaction to the loss, is about the loss. It's not about the change. Sometimes you can have a conversation with someone and say, what are you afraid of losing? Let's just talk about the thing you're afraid of losing. We have to be aware of white solidarity when white people that are afraid of loss get together and they subconsciously or unconsciously bully or double down or raise a flag of alarm that things are changing and like the whole organization is going to go under. It's going to be financially risky. They'll say those things to really inflame a room to make people go, no, we can't make these changes. But we have to stay diligent. We have to stay healthy. Maya, is there anything you want to recap on this before we move on to our next guest?
My only ask to to people listening into this and who are wanting to be advocates as well is that there are no bystanders in this. So if we have advocates and we have whiteness lashing out, there is no middle ground. There is no neutrality. I hear a lot of people saying they want to be neutral. There's no being neutral in this space. If you see advocates fighting, you have to join them. You cannot talk to them afterwards. You cannot send them an email or a text afterwards thanking them. You've got to speak in the moment, and you got to join the fight. So there's no bystanding anymore. That's really is my ask to the community. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So people of color understand the concepts that are going on, and then white people, as I lovingly say, get your people. help them help this, because some of them are really struggling. Thank you so much, Maya. PJ and Cassie, would love to hear some of your experiences around your wonderful model shift at your organization around distributed leadership. You want us to give us like a 1 or 2 minute recap of this work?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I can lead our little recap. So Cassie and I are both at Seattle Works. We're a pretty small organization in Seattle. There's 5 staff members, and we both came on about 3 years ago. And when we came on, it was in the midst of a lot of changes. They were reckoning with a lot of past harm that was done on BIPOC colleagues and really shifting a lot of the culture, because we started off just from a group of well-meaning but pretty entitled and resourceful white people, and that morphed into a lot of cultural norms that were just perpetuating a lot of harm on the team. So since we've come on about 2 years ago, we shifted to a fully distributed leadership. We're a team of 5 co-directors right now, and it's come with a lot of speed bumps for sure, and a lot of hurdles, but we're definitely living, I would say, like our most liberated lives within this work now. Yeah, I'd say some of the big tenets from that that we can share today were kind of peer-to-peer accountability, shifting decision-making power, really unpacking that, and just finding ways to unpack in a team of 5 where 4 of us identify as BIPOC and 1 person is white. There's still so many dynamics that come out, so many like hidden power dynamics that we all have to be just very self-aware and willing to communicate in ways that I think the workplace doesn't necessarily facilitate in a lot of ways. Yeah, so we're still learning, but it's been a journey.
Yeah, you are in many ways ahead of a lot of organizations. This is talked about quite often, and there is a lot of research and readings out there for people that are interested in thinking about distributed leadership power structure. Sometimes people call it shared leadership or shared power, and what that looks like. But you're ahead of where social sciences, organizational leadership programs, and academia are around this. You know, social science has told us that throughout time, through the history of mankind, people group themselves according to likenesses, whatever that may be, religion, physicality, tribes, etc. And then they naturally elect a leader. Even when you're looking at people in different continents, way back before we even could communicate with each other, this is a natural occurrence. And so there are a lot of natural obstacles to this distributed leadership power. There are some people who love this idea of being part of the decision making. Some people who just want to be told what to do and where to go. There are saboteurs. It's more expensive because it takes more time to get to those decisions. And at some point in the process, decisions will hurt someone, right? Someone doesn't get their way. And so I love you sort of mentioned a little bit about shared accountability, but often shared power doesn't come with shared responsibility and shared accountability. How did you get to, how do you make decisions? Because that's almost like the plan, the first thing, like what is the decision to make decisions?
Yeah, I think you are raising so many relevant points for us that we've been moving through. A big part of that is that there are no blueprints for this work. And even like you're saying, being ahead of the curve potentially, I think no matter what, as we lean into this work, there is not going to be any just one type of way to do this. It depends on your organization, your people, your environment, your communities. And that's the beautiful but really hard part about this process, is as we lean into reimagining systems that no longer serve us on global international scale, we don't really know what we're doing. We're just kind of tapping into like what feels right and what seems like it's representing everyone in the room, and just centering the voices in the room that, you know, previously haven't. So as we're doing that, we found that a lot of that means failing and trying again. And with accountability and decision-making, we've had a lot of moments where we were kind of like, oh, this wasn't it. This wasn't the way to do it. And I think in that process, you learn so much and you become better communicators and you're able to move forward. And we've moved through, right now, actually, we're doing a lot of work on what it means to allow people within their wheelhouse to just make a decision and not have everyone in the room for those decisions. We're a small team, so I think it's a little different for us. There's only 5, but because we're always looking out for each other and trying to ensure everyone feels good about the work we push forward, we really normalize everyone being in the room, having every voice at the table for a lot of big decisions. And we found that that has been hindering us in some ways, and it's keeping people from really stepping into their power and their roles. So we're moving through that right now, unpacking like what it means to truly let go of decision-making power as a team and just allow people to do that within their roles and then bring it to the rest of the team. And I think with accountability as well, we're trying on different hats to see what works for us with such a small organization. There's other organizations like Compass Point, a lot of leaders in this work that still have hierarchy within their distributed leadership. They'll have, like layers to it. And I think that works really well for some people. I feel like there's people in the community that'll look at us and think, cool, like no hierarchy, that's great. And I just try to reiterate that that might not be the best solution for the way that you're distributing power in your organization. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. So because we're in a unique situation without supervisors, we're moving through iterations of what it means to, hold each other accountable, be really honest with each other. And these are things that you have to be doing on a personal level. You can't just show up to work and suddenly be an amazing facilitator or amazing feedback, like leaning into conflict. There are a lot of personal ways that we show up in our lives that you have to work on, I think, to really lean into this work and feel comfortable with how uncomfortable it is.
It is so specific to each organization. And I'm glad you said that you embrace failure, because, if that is the case, then failure is a thing to learn from, right? And so fail big. If you embrace failure, fail big. You can learn from big failure. You can't learn from little tiny failures, right? So fail big. And I love you also mentioned that distributed leadership can exist in a hierarchical structure where there is still one person who is ultimately responsible. And that could be just based on how the job is structured, but it still means you can share power and share leadership. You think about Ocean's 11, right? There's one person who hired all these other people, but that one person, George Clooney, is not cracking the safes or doing the card games. He has shared that power amongst everyone on his team. The other thing I wanted to mention, this decision around making decisions, because there are many ways to make decisions, right? You can pull the decision out of a hat. You can have what most governments and boards use, which is the Robert's Rules of Order. You can use shared lead. You can use what's Brown's technique. It escapes me at the moment. But there are many ways to make decisions, and I think each organization should think about how do we want to make decisions that is the most equitable and the most inclusive. My last question for you is how is this sort of supporting your racial equity environment?
Yeah, just want to make space. Cassie, did you want to chime in at all?
Yeah, I think that I just want to uplift, Michael, you'd asked about decision making, and one of the most helpful resources that we found in our transition to sharing power and sharing leadership was Rainier Valley Corps, RVC, has a template decision making screen within their website, and we were able to take that and modify it to fit our needs as a team. And so that has allowed us to really lean into when we are making decisions, we are aligning with our values, and we have a way for us to decide when decisions are within our wheelhouse and when decisions need to come back to the full team, and we need to do it consensus based, right? I think one other thing to add on to what PJ shared, mentioning that flat structures are not for everyone. One thing that we are kind of coming up against right now is a growing team. And while flat structure really worked for us on a team of 5, a team of 6 might be too many cooks in the kitchen to have consensus decision making on a lot of our decisions. And so we are right now looking at what that means to reincorporate some of that hierarchy while also continuing to share that power and share decision making.
It's so good, and what an exciting time to witness what your organization is doing, to know that like the reason why those former decision-making ideas were considered best practices was because they were decided by one demographic of people. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best practice. It could mean it's the only practice, but it also just means it's a different practice. I appreciate you all thinking about new practices. Turn to pop up your slide to see if there's anything else you want to recap for everyone. I think you said it all.
Yeah, I think we covered it. I think the only thing for normalizing feedback that I would add is in all of our conversations. I mean, we do our best to incorporate it every time we make space for feedback, no matter what, just to kind of take the onus off people to bring up something, especially BIPOC colleagues, if something came up, whether it's harmful or they have feedback on something. I think it's been huge with our white colleagues, but also with us in our one-on-ones or whatever it is, just kind of making space at the end, like, hey, do you have any feedback around that? And opening up the space rather than putting it on people to kind of create that space.
Thank you. Go ahead, sorry, Cassie.
Oh yeah, just getting back to your last question, Michael, you'd asked how has this kind of allowed us to center racial equity within our organization? When we were making these transitions, we were centering people every single step of the way. And I think that's something that gets lost in the sauce in terms of operationalizing some of our changes towards becoming more inclusive, right? Forgetting that feelings and lots of opinions will come up during this, right? And so we've tried to stay whole person centered during this, because without our people, without our staff, our organization wouldn't be doing the work.
Great reminder to everyone that everything that we are doing is for the benefit of people. And so people should be centered in every decision that we make, not person, but people, right? And oftentimes we get to person and we don't think of people. Everyone, there's lots of research out there on distributed leadership and shared power. People are starting to think about best practices surrounding those. But I encourage you to look at that, because all of that science is showing that the benefit of that kind of model is so great, because what leaders are asked to do nowadays in this fast-paced moving world is virtually impossible. There's no way a leader can know all of the things that one needs to know. And so shared leadership is a valuable tool, not only for that leader, but also to keep everyone on the team engaged and feeling like they have agency with the work that you're doing. Thank you so much, PJ and Cassie. Next up, we'd love to talk to Luther about anti-racist grant making. We had a lot of discussions about this on our last workshop, but Luther is putting a bunch into practice. So Luther, we'd love to hear from you a couple of minutes on some of the things that you're doing that are having a great benefit.
I will start off by saying that this work has been ongoing for the last several years, even before I became the Artist Trust in different capacities. And the work that we're doing now has evolved to be, I would say, more intentional and more with the essence of care for the community that we're serving. And so I have to premise everything with that, and also to say that this work is ever growing and ever evolving, right? We haven't resolved and settled the whole more BIPOC artists need money. That's not resolved or anything. And so it's growing and ongoing conversation and practice. However, though, as far as the work that we're doing now and kind of how it started to be more intentional about that work, I have to call out the call out for Artist Trust in 2020. I would be remiss to not say that, because I think it took a lot of courage for the artists to do that and to let us know that we aren't doing the work that we say we're doing. And so that call out really ignited a more realistic approach to how we think about grants and grant making and how to think about serving artists through our funding opportunities. And so it really took a lot of conversation with communities, with the artists, with each other about what does it mean to be anti-racist and have racial equity in grant making. And it took to think about language, took to thinking about, okay, what does it mean to prioritize BIPOC artists without giving them just like a number, right? Then more than just numbers, right? It's all about people and human beings. And so what does it mean to prioritize those applications? What does it mean to check biases for our panelists? What does it mean to encourage expertise in the room beyond just, being an artist, but also lived experiences as an artist and as a BIPOC person practicing art. And so a lot of things we did was like, last year we completely changed one of our grant programs to be BIPOC only, which was exhilarating and very, very hard, but also very exciting. As you can imagine, a lot of people felt like they were left out of that grant program. And so it took a lot of us to be like, hey, like, this program is changed because of artists saying they want this program to happen. And so it's always thinking about what do the artists want and what are they telling us they want. And it's no thing to just be like, let's change something for this year. Call it a pilot program. Let's readjust and refocus after the pilot is done to think about it for next year. But there's no issue for us to be like, let's do it, because if artists are asking us to do it, we need to do it and think intentionally about doing it. And so a lot of our journey, a lot of our intention, a lot of our how we're shifting and reshaping is involving artists in a conversation and asking them what they want and taking those recommendations, suggestions as I won't say as law, but like as law in a sense. Like, if an artist is like, hey, why is there a resume for this grant program if it's about the progression of one's life and funding, remove it. We're like, oh my God, let's do that. Let's remove the resume. And it seemed like such an easy thing to do. But if an artist didn't say that, we would never have gotten there. And so I think a lot of our work around that is centering artists in the conversation, even down to a racial equity audit, which artists, of course, asked us to do for not call out. We had an audit last year with AV Consulting. They're a local Seattle firm who does racial equity consulting and racial equity audits. And within that audit, we have the usual stuff like look at the board bylaws, the policy, all the nuts and bolts things. But the biggest part of that was having artists at the table and them re-looking and revising our values. And so because of the conversation, the artists were like, hey, change all your values and make all your values have everything that deals with racial equity and include specific racial equity language in each of your new values. And for us, we're like, thank you. Thanks so much. Let's do it. Let's get it done. And they were the ones who decided what those values are going to be. And now they're on our website. Now we kind of live and thrive by them. And so again, thinking of artists as our experts and knowing that we would not exist without those artists, specifically BIPOC artists, because I think a lot of the conversation when it comes to artist trust work and those who feel left out of grants when we change small things to be more focused on BIPOC artists is that, well, things are shifting. I still need help. And it's like, yes, you also still need help. And also racial equity work is work for everybody. It benefits the entire ecosystem, right? And so it's not just for BIPOC people, it's for people who are white, people who, are low income, it's for everybody. And that's why I think also while we're doing this, we've been trying to, I don't want to say re-educate, because that seems so, but trying to let folks know that this work is important work for the landscape of art, right? And for the cultural landscape at large. And so that's kind of been our thing right now. In addition to, of course, all the internal work of okay, this is a great work environment. We're doing this work, but how do we make sure that this lasts beyond just us? I think a lot of what PJ and Cash was talking about as far as how do we solidify an actual culture to make sure that everyone feels kind of connected and thriving. We're kind of there where we're like, okay, we're feeling good about how we're working. We're feeling intentional about our work, how we're fundraising, how we're budgeting for racial equity every year, how we're re-envisioning our grants. How do we make sure that those on staff after us still can thrive in that same position environments, while also feeling empowered to be flexible and change things up for them as well? And so we're kind of in those conversations. But again, our biggest thing really is about what the artists want and what they're telling us they want and being intentional about how we're caring for our community.
Thank you for flagging that you are trying to embed this into the culture, because that is what's most important, everyone, that these policies of inclusion and listening to the people that are being affected by the work is being embedded into the practices of the organization. And what's so great about what you're doing is that philanthropy exists only to take care of people that need it the most. And so who are the people that know what they need but the people? And so what you're doing is you're going to the people that need the money and you're saying, how do I help you get this money? How do I help you? What can we do to change the way we've been doing it to make sure that you are at the center of the process? And I love the fact that you got that surprise about the resumes. Have there been any other surprises like that that would be intriguing for us to learn?
Yeah, the resume was the one. Even the idea. So we used to have this is the same grant program actually. We used to have a grant program that was project based, and of course, with that was like, provide a budget, give us a report, and all those things. And I think it was an artist who was just like, how about, you don't require people to give your report back? How about you don't require a budget? Because those, of course, cause barriers to any artist, but specifically BIPOC artists, right? Because of course, BIPOC artists, including myself, who's an artist, like we don't get that type of resources, right? We don't get kind of those privileges of learning how to build a budget just based off of our own life experiences and based off of other things that we're more worried about, right? And so the artist was like, remove the budget, take it away, report back, that sounds crazy, let's not do that. And we were like, oh, of course, like why are we requiring a budget? If we're saying we trust you as an artist to do what you want to do, why are we asking you to tell us what you did with the money, right? It makes no sense. And so that was a surprise for us. Even things like, conflict of interest, like, we had an artist being like, okay, like, we have this policy, and this is by no means, of course, like something we're working on now, but they have this policy, but inherently Native communities are so closely knit. This policy is kind of contradicting how close we are. So how can you go about thinking about that while also being inherent and also being like cognizant of like, legal stuff? We were like, oh, duh, that makes a lot of sense. Let's bring that back to conversation and think about what it means to talk about conflicts in relation to Indigenous communities who are so closely knit. And what does it mean to advocate for each other while also not causing a conflict? And so we're kind of in that mode as well, but that was a big like aha moment as well. It's like, oh, you're right. We can do more work and be more intentional about how to include and think about certain elements in the discussion of grant panels.
Yeah, we learned a lot in having, so the technique that Luther's using is now being called participatory grant making. We're actually talking to the participants about how to do the grants, but we learned things like, for people writing a grant for the first time, it's very intimidating. We were reviewing grants based on the quality of the grant writing, which meant that you had to have some experience. And so people writing grants for the first time, that was stressful. So they just chose not to write it because they didn't think they can compete, or the mastery of the English language, right? So if English is not your first language, you're screwed, right? And so one of the things we're going to be starting to do is looking at how we can do audio and video submission. So it's just about hearing directly from the artist and not evaluating their writing skills, because their writing doesn't matter. Luther, thank you so much. This is super great. The one thing I want to recap is that our whole government was designed, our whole country was designed on the idea of rejecting a single sovereign leader, right? We decided that the rules of this country will be designed by the people, right? And so it's interesting that now in 2022, which is almost 250 years after the founding of the country, we're just starting to look at how that filters down into our board work, our governance work, our actual government work, our grant making, our operational work. And so I'm so excited to see that there's a theme that's weaving us all together. But thank you so much, Luther.
Thank you.
Cassie, want to bring you back to talk a little bit about what you've been doing with affinity spaces and the benefit of separating white people from BIPOC people.
Yeah, so Luther just mentioned, racial equity work is for everyone, right? But the work that we have to do based on our identity markers is very different, right? Depending on our identities, we might have some internalized superiority to unpack, internalized oppression to unpack. And so doing the work in affinity spaces is so crucial for us to be able to do that work separately, right? To show up as our best selves for our colleagues when we do come together. I think some people are frightened or afraid of creating affinity spaces. I've heard people say in the past, why are we trying to, segregate? We need to come together as one. And again, this work that needs to be done is different for everyone, right? So doing the work in white affinity spaces so that white identifying folks are not putting the burden of educating on BIPOC colleagues is so crucial. The number of times I've heard BIPOC identifying folks talk about being harmed within equity, inclusion, diversity trainings, it's vast, right? And so I think that first and foremost, the work is different, right? And so one of the ways that Seattle Works has done this, internally, we offer racial affinity spaces. Prior to bringing on another BIPOC identified colleague, we had two white staff, and then it was 3 of us who identify as BIPOC. And during our equity team meetings, we would take time to break out into racial affinity groups and talk about what was coming up for us within the organization. And so we kind of normed on our white identified colleagues coming back and sharing out to BIPOC colleagues what they had talked about, and gave it as an option for us BIPOC identifying colleagues if we wanted to share out. And so that was one way that we've kind of incorporated that internally. And then in some of the changes that PJ and I talked about earlier that we've made to our organization, we leaned into one of our strategic goals of incorporating anti-racism education into all of our programming. And so that includes 2 public programs that's free for anyone to attend. We offer a white caucus for white identifying folks to come together with our amazing colleague Amanda to do some of that educating and learning without having to put any kind of burden on BIPOC identifying folks, right? And that work that Amanda is doing is driven by what we are bringing to her as something that we're seeing as a need for white identifying folks to talk about. And it will often coincide with what the BIPOC Link Up, our other racial affinity space that's open to the public, is also doing, right? So for example, in the past, we've done for the month of November, we've had guest speakers come in to talk about missing murdered Indigenous peoples. And that's something that both groups would talk about, but through the lens of the racial identity that they hold, right? And so we think it's really important to offer those spaces, again, so that when we do come together as an organization, as a multiracial group, we can show up as our best selves for our colleagues.
It's so great to have caring spaces for everyone, because our white colleagues are struggling with this change, and this change may take, anyone who's on this planet right now has been indoctrinated into one way. And so many white people are learning that the things they learned, the people that they learned from had maybe mistaught them or withheld from them. And so to have a space where they can be cared for, in addition to caring for BIPOC people, is super smart and super wonderful. And it reminds me that this notion that anti-racism is an act of love is ultimately about the love of everyone, even though that work may disrupt the status quo. It's very good. And as I said again, the status quo is not an accident. And anyone that is okay with the status quo, I hope you are working to be not okay with the status quo, because we should always work to disrupt it. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cassie. Would love to open it up to bring all the panel back on, open it up to our invitees to ask any questions they have. We have about 8 minutes or so, or 7 minutes or so before we have to recap. I know there was a question or comment earlier from Roseanne. Do you want to pop on and ask your question, Roseanne?
Yes, it might be a comment instead of a question. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so with regard to a board, any board, trying to bring equity to it and so on, boards just have something going against them inherently. And one is that everybody hates coming to board meetings. That's really rough. If you don't, some people enjoy it, but generally speaking, there's inevitably a person who's looking at the person running the meeting, and they used to tap on their watch, but we don't wear watches anymore. So they're tapping at their watch and indicating it's time to wrap it up. And so, it's really hard to get something substantive and meaningful with any feeling to it in a board meeting often, because they have to end. So you need to plan for retreats and other things like that in order to really hear from people. It strikes me that many people come onto a board because, by golly, they want to do some stuff. They want to change things. Maybe they don't really know anything about what's been going on, but it just looks like a great place to try to make some big changes and do some exciting things. And what ends up happening is that, wanting to go outside the box, think outside the box before you even know what's in the box. And that is, I think, the responsibility of people who have been managing the organization. So, something that we don't seem, at least in organization I've been in, not enough time ever to do, but really, as far as I'm concerned, much more important than knowing what's in the bylaws, as Arthur said, is to look at what you just did, that program that you just did out there in the community. What about it? Who did you reach? What do you know about it? Have you asked anybody? What did you think about it? All these things take time. But it strikes me that in bringing people onto a board, even if a person of color you invited to come and join the board and they end up not wanting to come on your board, ask them, what do you think of this program we did? And take them through it. What could we have done to make it better? I think that the lack of information about what has happened in the past, just in general, lack of information or not wanting to be informed and simply not caring what was the history. There's a bit of the status quo that is quite valuable, that there ought to be respect for what the history of an organization has been. So I think that being uninformed is one of the horrible things that's working against all of us. Is if you want to be on a board, I think it's responsibility to know the history. I think that respect ought to be shown. And then I do think there should be a constant reassessment of what you just did, and have people of color and others look at it, help you, make an assessment of it so that you can start those corrections, whether that person comes onto your board or not.
Thanks so much, Roseanne. And I think that you all have had a pretty big shakeup in Seattle with one of your colleagues at a contemporary theater, where the whole board is in the process of reassessing what it means to be on a board. And I've written a couple of times about this. I think the model is broken, and I think it needs to be redesigned.
It's going on in many organizations, honestly.
It is, absolutely.
So I think there's a big shakeup everywhere.
Yep. Byron, I think you have a comment you'd like to make, or question?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for all of this. And I think my question is directed to Maya. I really appreciate what you said about, I think you said like shadow boards and the white resistance to change, and using the excuses of but for financial responsibility we need to do X, Y, or Z. I'm the artistic director of an organization, and I've made it my policy to hire a majority of BIPOC artists. And I'm working increasingly on giving them leadership roles so that so their voices can honestly be heard. And yet I recognize that the leaders of the organization are still all white, and the board is majority white, and the biggest donors are all white. It's easy for me to say, okay, well, I'm going to make it my policy to hire people of the global majority as the majority of the artists, because I'm paying them, I'm offering them money. But getting volunteers on, the question that I have is, do you have any suggestions for how to make the board something that non-white people will even want to volunteer for when they, at this point, they're coming in as minorities?
It's a great question. It's a question I ask myself every day. So thank you for asking this question. I think asking this question is actually the first step, right? I mean, I call it recognizing or seeing it. So seeing is the first step, that you're seeing that you bringing in BIPOC artists is not the final checkbox that's going to complete your work, that you're bringing them, and that's just the first step. Now you have to recognize that given whiteness, not even in white people, but even in people of color, BIPOC, I have to constantly check myself 7 times a day, my reactions, my responses, my emails to check myself. So there's so much whiteness. We've all been born and raised and trained and rewarded and recognized for conforming to whiteness, and so it's in all of us. I think you're recognizing that when they come into these spaces, it's going to be really hard for them every day. Even like a lot of times you may think a meeting went well, but it's not for us to decide the meeting went well. It's that feedback loop that the Seattle Works team talked about. There has to be constant feedback. There has to be constant check-ins. Was this meeting okay? Was the language okay here? Did we actually make progress? And I think our measures, our lens, our language, our micro behaviors, our expectations, everything has to be inspected. And so keep at it. We'll all keep at it, and I think when I see my BIPOC colleagues, tell me I was helpful, it makes it all okay to get up tomorrow and do the hard work all over again. And that's all we do. We don't ask for where the end is. We just keep doing it every day.
Thank you so much, Byron and Maya. I think we sadly have to wrap up, but I'm hoping that our panelists are willing to share their contact information in maybe the follow-up email. So in case people have questions, they can. But I think the main thing to remember is that anti-racism is an act of love, and that we all have attended a lot of workshops and readings and conversations. And don't forget, the rule is, what will you do with the information that you have? How do you make the world a better place? And when all of this is said and done, what side of history will you be on? The main practice I can offer you all, and this is somewhat aligned with what Maya was saying, was that if a person of color tells you something is racist, believe them. Believe them first. Don't debate, don't deny, question with grace so that you can fix that thing, but just believe them. If you just do that, and start fixing those things, it's going to get better and better every single day. But part of this is about making it an intentional practice so that it can become part of your culture and your everyday life. And then we're going to get to a place where we're not having to work so hard because we are an anti-racist country, world, society, organization. Thank you, panelists, so much. I learned from you today. I think we all have, and I'll turn this all back over to Vanya.
Okay. Thank you so much again. I've learned so much, and I took some notes, and I just love the word intentionality, because that right there, intentionality in your actions make change all around. So thank you all for attending and participating in today's forum. Your insights and input are very valuable to us, and we want to continue engaging you at every step in our journey here at East Hub, as we transform the East Side into an inclusive and vibrant cultural destination. We would also like to thank our elected officials who attended: Bellevue City Mayor Lynn Robinson and Bellevue City Council Member Conrad Lee. Thank you very much. We hope that you will sign up for our next event and final event in the series. The next workshop is Equity is More Than a Word, and that will be on Thursday, November 17th. And Sadishna will be posting that registration in the chat, the links there. We want to again thank our amazing panelists and the organizations they represent. We will also have in the chat some links to Artist Trust, Sophia Way, Seattle Works, and Healing Equity United. And last but not least, we want to thank Amazon and Facebook for their sponsorship of our Culture Creates Community event series, and Microsoft for their valuable foundational support. Please subscribe to our newsletter for updates on future events. On behalf of everyone at East Hub, we thank you for attending and have a fabulous afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, panelists.
Thank you, panelists. This was just amazing.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone.